Cet entretien que vous vous apprêtez à voir est un témoignage de la vie dans le pays le plus dangereux du monde. Aux médias, nous recevons Mariam, qui est membre de RAWA. RAWA, c'est l'association révolutionnaire des femmes d'Afghanistan. De par ses prises de position contre le régime taliban, sa vie est en danger et nous nous devons de préserver son anonymat. Sa venue en France dans le cadre d'une tournée de conférences en Europe est exceptionnelle et c'est dans ce contexte que nous la recevons. C'est aussi l'occasion de rappeler que la population afghane est toujours dans une situation plus qu'instable, privée des aides internationales et livrée à la barbarie des différents mouvements qui sévissent dans le pays. Le 30 septembre, 53 personnes, dont 46 femmes et jeunes filles, ont perdu la vie dans un attentat suicide à la bombe. Elles passaient un test pour leur admission à l'université. Plus d'1 an après la prise de pouvoir des talibans, on ne peut pas continuer de fermer les yeux sur le régime de terreur qui bâillonne toujours les Afghans. Hello Mariam, can you introduce yourself and the RAWA Association?
My name is Mariam Rawi. I'm representing the Revolutionary Association of the Women of Afghanistan, which is one of the oldest political, social organization of Afghan women, established in 1977 in the capital city of Kabul. This organization was established by the efforts of a lady called Mina, who herself later was assassinated by the KGB agents and by the fundamentalists of Gulbuddin Hekmatyar. Since the very beginning, RAWA believed that the rights of women, the equality, injustice to women can be given, can be achieved only by the fight of women themselves. Women should be educated, they should raise their awareness, they should be mobilized, and that was the reason that this independent organization of women was made, because we were living in Afghanistan, a country which did not face only political challenges, but a very male-dominated society. Independence of a political group of women was very important. So beginning from those years, and 77 up till now, RAWA has been in forefront of the fight against fundamentalism, against the former Soviet Union occupation. Also, RAWA strongly stood up against the presence and occupation of the US military troops and NATO troops in Afghanistan. We always believed that the fundamentalism, terrorism, or those groups, those elements which were created by the direct support of the United States, by the direct support of CIA, and several other intelligences around our country. Focusing on these political issues, we also provided social assistance to needy women, mainly by providing free education to them, arranging different literacy classes all around Afghanistan, home-based classes, especially these days that the Taliban closed the schools for girls. We are trying to bring a number of girls to the home-based classes, which are the secret kind of a school, and providing education, different subjects, science, maths, English, to these girls who cannot go to school. Literacy classes are mostly offered for the elder women who are interested in being able to learn reading and writing. Besides the projects such as food distribution, we have a healthcare facility, a mobile health team that goes around in different provinces, especially in the emergency situations like the earthquake and flood, to provide help to the people. And these are all those work and those initiatives that have been supported by the small donations and funds collected through the network of supporters of RAWA around the world. And here I am especially for a speaking tour in Europe, basically in Italy, because we do have a group of supporters who arrange all the trip and made it possible, because, you know, coming from Afghanistan, traveling abroad, all the documentation, the visa process in one side. And being a RAWA member, a RAWA activist, a female political activist under the domination of Taliban was not something easy to organize.
For the context in Afghanistan, I wanted to know what the things that changed in the country since the Taliban came back at the head of the country.
The only thing changed that situation, especially for women, worsened, because it's not the first time we see Taliban in the government. It is the second period of Taliban. And throughout the history, the recent history of Afghanistan, we have seen that the United States and CIA and several other Western governments have been involved in Afghanistan to support fundamentalism and terrorism, because this is the policies of most of the imperialist countries to support such medieval-minded group, to give them armed political support and fund. And this was done through the networks such as Pakistani intelligence of ISI, Iran, and several other. And that's the reason that we had different names and titles and groups and forms of fundamentalists in Afghanistan. The Mujahideen, the Northern Alliance, the Jihadists, and later in 1996, the group emerged under the name of Taliban. Now, after September 11th, United States sent its troops under the false name of fight on terror, under the false slogan of bringing democracy and women's rights to our country. But practically from the very beginning, RAWA was one of the very first organizations said that the United States presence in Afghanistan is only for its own economic goals, for the strategic interest that they have in the region, but not in favor of people. And after 20 years, what was left in Afghanistan being known for the highest rate of corruption, being known for producing highest rate of drugs and opium, and of course, the most dangerous country on the world, the most insecure country of the world. So it was obvious that when Taliban came, the situation worsened for women. Now, women are not allowed to go to school. They are forced to have the burqa. It's even the color that's decided for them that only should be used as the black color. They are not allowed to go outside of their houses, traveling alone and using public transport. Most of them have lost their jobs. And it's not just women's situation, but if we see the economic system of Afghanistan is completely collapsed. It was already a destroyed, a poor country. But in the recent few months, we saw that none of the government agencies, none of the government services are operating anymore. Most of the private businesses have collapsed. So we can see that the judicial, the executive system of Afghanistan has completely broken. And somehow we can say that the life has stopped. And on the top of all this list, the poverty and the miseries of women, security situation and uncertain situation remain the same problem for the Afghan people. Every day, every single minute, we are not sure what happens the next, because at any time of the day, in any public place or even the private place, the hospitals, the schools, classes, courses, offices, aid agencies have been attacked of the suicide attacks, explosions, bombings. The rate of target killing has increased a lot. Taliban especially targeting activists, political activists, former police and military of the government. Several women have lost their lives. They have been victim of shooting of Taliban because they were women's rights activists, because they were journalists, because they were healthcare providers. And this is how the situation we are facing. But luckily, from the very first days, women came up in the streets, showed their resistance, proved that they are not the same women as they were 20 years ago. They are much stronger in organizing protests and demonstrations and raising their voice against Taliban regime.
We are talking about women and the rules they are living under, but what it is to be for young girls, because they don't have schools and other things, and what is it to live in the country when you are young?
I was just telling that Afghanistan is already a very male-dominated society, living under a very feudal system and patriarchal system. But with the movement of the time, of course, several women got and knew the importance of the knowledge in education, the role that the knowledge in education can play, and not thanks to the presence of the United States, but thanks to the efforts of the people, thanks to the efforts of the women especially, who were living in the cities, and they worked very hard to be educated, find the ways how to know more about the world, about the women's movement in other parts of the world, about the resistance, even in universities. The Taliban religious police are controlling not only the dressing way of the girls student, or not only the makeup they wear, or for example wearing a perfume is not allowed, but also they are controlling a lot. The religious police is controlling that women should not choose the subjects that are considered mostly suitable for men, like computer sciences, languages, and some science-related or some technology-related subjects that Taliban believe that's not suitable for women. And unfortunately, the young girls are not given seats in these classes. If universities are not closed, but they are under too much pressure and restriction from Taliban authorities. You probably have seen some pictures that there are curtains and walls that separates boys from the girls. None of the girls, female students, are allowed to talk to the male teachers, or the male teachers are not allowed to talk to these female teachers are not allowed to talk to these male students. And this is how they try to, according to their own mentality, Taliban are trying to not only limit the rights of education to the younger, but also any sorts of development and awareness that they would like to have, any kind of achievements that they dream for their lives. The chances are limited under the Taliban.
Can we say that women are in danger living in Afghanistan right now?
Definitely, even before Taliban, according to some organizations, Afghanistan was called the most dangerous place to be born as a woman. And I think it's even worse now under the Taliban. Unfortunately, we as Afghan women are not victim of just the fundamentalism and the US occupation, but in the meanwhile, the victim of the culture and tradition and the feudal system that I told you. And that's why the life we have is much difficult comparing to the many other women in other parts of the world. And also the struggle that we are carrying out is not an easy struggle, and a struggle that takes lots of sacrifices and courage to keep it up. I told you that in the last few months, a lot of female activists have been arrested, have been killed, kidnapped, or just missing, gone missing. There was a very detailed report of Amnesty International, which was about the torture that the female prisoners faced after the protests under the Taliban controlled regime. And in this report, the victims were telling that they were mostly beaten in their chest and under the legs, because they were told by Taliban that we will beat you on those parts of the body that you will not be able to show, you will not be able to prove it. A lot of women have been raped, a lot of women have been threatened and warned that if they keep on their political activity or their protest, the male members of the family, their sons and husbands, might be killed or might be arrested. Even when Taliban are forcing hijab, forcing burqa on women, they always keep trying and threatening women that we will beat you, but also we will arrest the male member of your family.
You, as a political activist and member of RAWA, have you been threatened by the past or by the Taliban?
One of the very important things that RAWA used as a method to more work as a secret and underground organization, and especially when it comes to those members who go in the public and do the interviews and tours and things like this, they will not show their faces. We do not publish our photos or video interviews. And of course, the names we are using are not the real names that we have on our IDs. And these are those small steps or techniques that can protect us and makes us able to survive and to work there. If you were not underground organization or secret organization, of course we could have been very easily victim of the attacks of fundamentalists and different regimes that were in Afghanistan. And the only chance we had to remain without the title of RAWA, like most of the humanitarian projects we are running in Afghanistan, they cannot be operated openly under the name of RAWA.
What does RAWA claim, like revendication?
What we demand is having a democracy based on secular system. Why secularism is so important in Afghanistan? It's simply because in the last 40 years, Afghan people have been tortured under the name of religion, under the name of Islam. And we have seen the most terrible faces of political religious groups in Afghanistan. And that's the reason that we believe that any sort of peace and justice will not be completed without a secular system, without democracy. And in Afghanistan, talking about a secular democracy itself is equal to infidelity. That's one of the reasons that RAWA is always called a very radical organization, that RAWA is called an infidel organization. Also because we ourselves, the name we are bearing, the word revolutionary in our organization, which we believe the fight of women in Afghanistan to change the system from the deep, within the deep roots that it has in the society, and the whole system should be changed. It's a revolution, but a revolution of women. This is what we were talking about 40 years ago, but now what we see in Kurdistan, what we see in Iran, those places which has very similarities to Afghanistan, it's proved that if a revolution happened in these countries, it will be definitely by women and under the leadership of women for the equality and justice of whole humanity.
What are you hoping for to change in Afghanistan?
Of course, as I told you, that all human beings naturally want peace and prosperity and development and a better life, a secure life for themselves and for their children and for their families. But unfortunately, Afghan nation has been decades far from dreaming such life. And we as a nation want to say to the people of the world that it's not our culture, it's not our tradition to be violent, to shed each other's blood, to be killed under the name of ethnic or religion. But what we really wish is to be a nation which keeps its unity, which fights against any form of fundamentalists, if it's jihadis, mujahideen, Northern Alliance, or Taliban, and a people that believes the importance of achieving democracy and peace by their own efforts, by their own fight. Because Rawa always stated that they imported, the so-called imported democracy and women's rights by the United States and by NATO troop was something very breakable, fragile, and something was not accepted by our people. And I think, as said before, that it has a long way to go, and much of the courage and efforts that should come from men and women in our society. We think that it is a very big lesson, a very big inspiration for the Afghan women, what's happening today in Iran. So what we wish is, briefly, I can say what is happening today in Iran, that it should be the near future for Afghanistan too.
I was wondering, when you see this, what is happening there, does that inspire the Rawa into what could happen in Afghanistan?
Yes, definitely. As I told you, what's happening in Iran, sharing a border with Iran, sharing the culture and language and a part of the history with Iran. Of course, any political change there will definitely affect the movement and the struggle of Afghan women in Afghanistan. We do not believe that the solution to the Afghan crisis is the so-called federal system that most of the jihadis nowadays are calling for or demanding it. It's not to break country into pieces. It's not to break the nation under the name of Pashtun and Tajik or Hazara, but to do what the Iranian people are doing, coming all the nationalities and ethnics and religious groups together, standing up and supporting especially the women against the Islamic religious fundamentalist regime there.
When you see the support, like in France, people are doing manifestation, demonstration to support Iranian women, are you waiting for the same kind of demonstration for Afghanistan?
Definitely, we as activists, we want more attention, though we know that the mainstream media, the media that's paid and controlled and run by the imperialist countries and by the Western governments, they are a very powerful tool to protect the interests and the agenda of these governments. Of course, we do not expect much from them to talk about the real situation in countries like Afghanistan. The image they portray from Afghanistan is completely different in many cases of what's happening in reality in Afghanistan. But the free media here, the independent media here, must play a very important role in bringing a different picture, a different voice from Afghanistan, the voice of resistance from Afghanistan, not the resistance of Northern Alliance and jihadist group, but the real democratic groups in Afghanistan, like Rawa and several other organizations there. And I think that in this case, then the world population can have the interest, can have the involvement, can have the attention. If the media is not playing its role and its responsibility, of course, people cannot be aware. But fortunately, we have seen that if the governments, the Western governments, including the French government as part of the NATO, send its troop in Afghanistan as very close ally to the United States. But majority of the people in European countries stand up against these policies of their governments and stood by the anti-war movement and independent movements in Afghanistan and supporting justice and democracy in our countries.
Do you think another intervention, like the US did a couple of years ago, from foreign armies could not fix the situation but help, or you should avoid it?
Well, it's hard to say what will be the next scenario for Afghanistan. What happened today in Afghanistan was part of a deal between the lackeys, which were Taliban, and the master, which was the United States. 2 years before the arrival of Taliban, there was the negotiation going on between both sides. There was the secret security agreement signed between them. The release of the 5,000 prisoners from the Afghan jails, and the establishment of office in Qatar, in Doha, which give a lot of moral support and political support to Taliban, all proved that United States was not honest in its war against terrorism, but it played what we call a Tom and Jerry game to support Taliban keep its link to Taliban. Not just Taliban, but several other. Since Taliban seized the power in Afghanistan, in the meanwhile, we receive reports that Daesh is becoming stronger in the last year. And it's definitely receiving these weapons and financial support from the countries like United States. And that's why we believe that though the military of the United States is not any more present in Afghanistan, but they have their interests, they have their links, especially these days that China and Russia, as two opponent powers of the United States, are also involved in Afghanistan, are also trying to build relationship with the Taliban. These two countries are trying their best as neighboring, surrounding areas of Afghanistan to have a very good relationship with the Taliban. And this always can be counted as a threat for the United States. That's why we always said that the United States is already trying to support new names and new titles of the new terrorists and fundamentalists will appear in Afghanistan, which will be much more brutal and savage comparing to what we have now. And the history of the last 20 years, not just in Afghanistan, but what happened in Iraq, in Iran, in Turkey, it's proved that fundamentalists are becoming supporter. And as I told you, that there are those lackeys, there are those puppets who are used. They have like a fixed expiry date. For a specific period of time, they are used. They are good friends, they are good allies of the United States. But as soon as they are not used anymore, they are not useful anymore, they are killed, they are eliminated under the false claims of fighting against terrorism, like what happened a few months back when al-Zawahiri, one of the al-Qaeda leaders, was killed in Kabul. It's a big question for majority of the people in Afghanistan, that why these Taliban leaders who were in the blacklist of the United Nations, who were wanted, who are still wanted by the FBI and CIA themselves, are not arrested. They are still holding positions in the government. If United States is honest in its fight, why they are not targeting the same what we did with the al-Zawahiri? It's something that happened in many countries of the world. We have seen many experiences in Latin America that the puppets who were installed in specific regimes, with a period, then they were thrown back and they were killed. This is the way of work or the method of work of the United States imperialism.
And when you are doing your meetings, are you hoping for governmental action from the country you are going to?
If you mean country from their governments, we do not expect anything like this from their governments, not from the big institutions, even not from the institutions such as United Nations and many other international bodies that are acting and are working in Afghanistan. That's completely different because you see that, for example, the European Parliament give most of its prizes and awards to well-known fundamentalist female figures. Because when we talk about fundamentalism in countries like Afghanistan, this is not represented only by men, but female figures also exist there. French government itself have been involved very much deeply in supporting fundamentalists, especially the Northern Alliance, especially Ahmad Shah Massoud, and nowadays the young son of Ahmad Shah Massoud, Ahmad Massoud himself, who is like a very loved, blue-eyed for the French government, and it proves that these governments, including the French government, has exactly like the United States, but probably on a lower level, its own interests in Afghanistan, and also supporting fundamentalism to prove to the United States that they are following the same line of policy. They are not doing something the opposite. So that's why we are not expecting from any of these European governments to have a different policy from what the United States has in Afghanistan. But definitely we do expect support and raising awareness among democratic groups, revolutionary groups, organizations, parties, movements, anti-war movement, which was very strong after September 11, and several intellectuals and individuals who are against the policies of their governments, who want to be in favor of freedom and democracy and human rights, not just in their own country, but all over the world.
If you had the opportunity to talk to the French people who are going to watch this, what is the message you want to spread? You have all the time you want.
Well, especially for the French people, I would say that they should force their government to not have close ties to the fundamentalist leaders of Afghanistan. They are deceiving French people. I mean, the fundamentalists, Afghan fundamentalists, are deceiving French people by showing themselves very westernized in culture, using the ties and Western dressing. But their mentality, their nature, their brutalities, what they did during the last 4 decades of war in Afghanistan was not different from the Taliban. We always tell that Northern Alliance and the current so-called resistance of Massoud's son is exactly the two sides of the same coin. Taliban and these fundamentalists have no difference. They are misogynist. They do not believe on democracy. It's remembered very well when these leaders were calling democracy equal to infidelity, and something, even election, even voting was not accepted by them. But later, they changed themselves. They tried to pretend themselves differently, only to enjoy the financial support, only to enjoy the political backing of several governments, including the French government. French government had been directly involved in giving military and financial support to Massoud himself. The only thing that we want, that this should be stopped, and this can be stopped only if people are aware and if people get involved. When one of the streets, one of the roads, and I think it's 8th district of Paris, is named under Massoud, we definitely expected this from the people of France, who have a brilliant history, a glorious history of fight for justice. They should have stood up in that time, should have not allowed that a criminal leader from Afghanistan have its name in one of the roads in Paris.
Thank you. That's
You're
it.
welcome.
You can.